The first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy see Moses reviewing the history of Israel. Then in chapters 5 to 28, we have what is widely regarded as the main section of the book, where Moses gives Israel its laws and statutes. Following this, a second covenant is made in chapter 29, and after this, Moses' successor Joshua is chosen and instated. Deuteronomy is critical for the inculcation of the law, especially for future generations. As they stand at the border of the promised land, so they stand on the cusp of the future. It is vital at this point to consider the past. As one scholar has pointed out, even though Moses here speaks to the second generation, he speaks as though it was they who participated in all the things of the first generation, from the Exodus to meeting God at Sinai, the rebellions, and so on. The point is to remember the past and identify with it, so that all future generations inherit this history and identity. Therefore, the current generation is encouraged to tell the stories, answer questions, and explain why certain things are done. If you remember from Numbers 32, 3 tribes asked Moses if they could settle east of the Jordan: the Reubenites and the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Moses permitted this, so long as they agreed not to settle down until they had conquered the land west of the Jordan with their brother tribes. This is the situation which Moses is recalling in chapters 2 to 3, with the 2 Amorite kings, Sihon in chapter 2 and Og in chapter 3. Og and his kingdom are obliterated by the Israelites, and his land is given to Manasseh. The defeat of Og is referred to a number of times throughout the Old Testament, including Psalms 135 to 136, so it was obviously seen as significant. Another interesting detail added to our text is that he was reputed to be the last of the Rephaim, an ancient race of giant warriors. Verse 11 states that his iron bed can still be seen in Rabbah, and it measured 13.5 feet by 6 feet. As this was the Bronze Age, it is notable for the fact of it being iron, which was probably why it was preserved as an artifact rather than for its size. Once again, though, we are confronted with the brutality of the total destruction of Og's kingdom, which included women and children. Deuteronomy 20 will give rules for how Israel is to conduct their warfare, which are not so ruthless and will spare women and children. However, these rules seem to apply to normal warfare and not to this special period of dispossessing the land, which is part of Yahweh's judgment on the people. We remember also that the same treatment is promised to Israel if they behave likewise, and we also ought to remember the span of God's judgment, that it takes place over a very long time. There is plenty of time to repent, and many chances are given. Nevertheless, for people like us who are long accustomed to peace, such violence seems beyond comprehension. We must trust that the God of all the earth does what is right, as Abraham asked. With these 2 military successes and the first 2.5 tribes provisionally settled, Moses longs to see what God will do next as Israel takes the promised land. But the Lord is stern in his response. Moses must accept what he has been told and focus on the remaining task in hand, which is to prepare his successor. He is in this a model of obedience and duty in the face of personal denial. In chapter 4, Moses exhorts the people to keep the law when they go into the land. This section stresses the memory of the great events of the Exodus and urges that they be taught from generation to generation. As I mentioned earlier, this second generation is co-identified with the first which experienced these things. Notice in verses 9 to 21 how Moses addresses them as though they were there. As though, for example, in verse 12, they were there at Sinai and heard the voice of God. In verses 6 to 8, the result of their obedience will be honour among their neighbours, who will marvel at their wisdom and discernment, and marvel at the fact of the Lord's presence in their midst, who hears their prayers. There are then strong warnings against idolatry in this chapter, and in verse 15 Moses advises them to watch themselves closely. Idolatry is an easy thing to slip into, and there are many opportunities, especially in the land they are entering. Verse 24 affirms that God is a devouring fire, a jealous God. Moses then gives a prophecy in verses 25 to 31, which relates to the exiles. It is true in all its details, which include, thankfully, that God will remember his covenant so as not to completely destroy them. And so, in verses 39 to 40, the Israelites must remember that there is no other God in heaven or on earth, and that if they would live in the land a long time, they will keep his commands and pass them on.